Thanks to Windows on the World.
Bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories on tonight's show. Windows on the World covered the alternative event to United Nations COP21 in Paris. The climate change agenda is being enforced by the unelected UN and their Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which bases the global warming theory on what is now found to be fraudulent data. The Climate Challenge offered real scientific analysis of the available data and featured experts in the field. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have altered scientific fact and created fraud with their models and projections, which are presented as scientific fact. The talks from the Climate Challenge are available on www.pcc15.org and the Windows on the World YouTube channel. This global enforcement of the climate change agenda by the unelected UN through local government threatens the way of life of everyone on the planet and is to be enforced by global governance through the UN. Windows on the World have covered this and how it is enforced globally through Agenda 21, now rebranded Agenda 2030, with the Vatican also on board. This is about massive taxation, control of population, and the loss of all individual rights, including private transport and property. Check out our article, Big Society Change Agents, on windowsontheworld.net, and the show UN Destroys London on windowsontheworld.net and YouTube. We have covered London's so-called mini Holland schemes, showing how this is being implemented locally in the UK with no public consultation. The speakers at the Climate Challenge included Stuart Agnew, Piers Corbyn, Ed Flaherty, Philip Foster, Roger Helmer, Tom Harris, Donna Laframboise, Viscount Christopher Monckton, Patrick Moore, Niels Axel Morner, Ian Plimer, Murray Selby, Roger Tattersall and many more. So I'm with Lord Christopher Monckton at the Paris Climate Challenge. Lord Monckton, welcome to Windows on the World.
Well, it's lovely to be with you, and I've just been thinking about what this Paris conference means, and it really means nothing. This is, if you like, the bath full of dirty water, and somebody has tried to keep the heat in the water by putting some more water in, and so the dirty water rises, and then it reaches its peak level. And then as it begins to recede, it leaves a tide mark, a grubby mark behind it. And that was the high point of the totalitarian climate scam. And from here on, you'll see the water beginning to drain out of the bath. You'll be able to see where the high point was. It was this year here in Paris. And then from here on in, it's all going to just disappear very slowly. And people will gradually shift the emphasis of their expenditure and their governmental activities to something else. Of course, they will attempt to establish a world government using the climate as an excuse. But on the experience of the European Union, which was a regional attempt at global government, that too will fail because democratic nations in the end won't stand for it. And unless they stop us voting, they can't in the end stop us bringing our sovereignty back, even if they try to hand it away here at Paris, as most countries will do. But we will take it back.
That's very encouraging to hear you say that, because I see the Agenda 21 policies being played out in London on quite a massive scale now. And people are now realising that they are having no choice at local level. This consensus reality that's been forced upon them is finally sinking in. But I'm seeing the results of that with basically the banning of cars in areas and these villages being formed, which are these UN Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 ideas for sustainable development. Now, these sustainable development plans are built into every single council in the country. So what would you say to people to counteract this?
In England, two words: vote UKIP, because the United Kingdom Independence Party opposes this whole nonsense of Agenda 21, all this climate nonsense, root and branch, and it is the only major British party to do so. So vote UKIP, and we will make this go away. We will take back the power to govern ourselves, and we will, of course, as everyone must, respect the environment around us and look after it. But to use it as a pretext for establishing essentially the nationalisation of private property, because that's really what it's about.
Exactly.
That's what Agenda 21 really is all about. At local level, bypassing national governments, the local authorities are going for this. Well, UKIP is getting into those local authorities, and it is throwing out these programmes one by one each time it takes control of a local authority. So your simple answer, if you don't want your freedom and your property rights taken away forever, is to vote UKIP.
That's really good, because this is the crux of it, is the abolition of private property and private transport, and basically personal freedom. It's consensus over individual rights.
And remember, it's not consensus. There is no scientific consensus behind
they call
it.
it consensus.
This is purely a political expedient on the part of the extreme totalitarian left, just as Hitler, the totalitarian extreme left in National Socialist Germany, argued that the Jews were a bad thing. He had no scientific basis for it, but he said that was the consensus. Then we had the Lysenko, Trofim Denisovich Lysenko, under Stalin, again saying there's only one scientific point of view on how you make your seed corn mature, and he destroyed 20 successive harvests, killed something like 20 million people of starvation. Chinese communists again did the same thing, 30 million people killed because they pursued so-called scientific policies that were actually anti-scientific. Now we have the totalitarian left having captured the environmental movement. The first thing they did was to kill 50 million people by banning DDT just at the point where malaria had almost been eradicated. Now it's getting on for 1 million people a year again. And now the environmental socialists are at it again, this time with global warming, and they're killing tens of millions already by denying the Third World and Africa the coal-fired, cheap, reliable, clean, continuous power that alone can lift them out of poverty and hence stabilise their populations and ultimately reduce the environmental footprint. So the moral from all this is don't let the totalitarians rule. It's we the people that should rule, and if we the people get our say, then the totalitarians will have to do as they are told by us and not the other way round.
That's really good to hear as well. But as far as the change agents go that have been put into communities, these have been trained, thousands of them, and they are bringing in the policy. So
fear not, because they don't have the truth. They have the money, the power, and the glory, but we have the truth.
That's brilliant, because I remember what you said a while ago was it's all over bar the shouting. So do you really believe that?
I said this is the high tide mark now. From here on in, it's all downhill for them, and it's uphill. It's always an uphill struggle to get the truth to be realised. But I think we have essentially already won the intellectual argument, and it's only a matter of time before the politicians realise it and are forced, whether they like it or not, to adjust to the truth.
Thanks very much, Lord Monckton.
Bless you.
I'm with Donna Laframboise, who's an investigative journalist who's looked into the IPCC and written 2 books really about what the policies of the IPCC are all about, which is consensus science. So, Donna, welcome to Windows on the World.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, just give us a bit of your background, how you started looking into the IPCC and briefly what you found.
Well, I'm a journalist, and I started very much just out of personal interest looking at the climate debate, and it seemed to me that it was a little more complicated than what we were hearing in the mainstream media. So I did a bit of research, and very quickly I've realized that there were many very interesting and compelling perspectives by very qualified people that weren't being reported. And so I thought there was a problem with that we should have a diversity of views and that the public should be exposed to that broad range of opinions so that the public could make its own informed decision. So that's where I started, and almost by accident, I began concentrating on this UN body, the most important climate body in the world that writes this report that gets quoted and cited by governments all around the world. And that report, an assessment report it's usually called, and there's now been 5 of them by the IPCC, is the reason we're spending trillions of euros and trillions of pounds and dollars fighting climate change. And what I've come to realize is that the IPCC claims to be a scientific organization. You go to its website and it says we are a scientific body. Well, I'm sorry to say that is nonsense. That in fact the the title of that organization, the name of it is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the definition of intergovernmental is between two or more countries. This is politics. This is countries working together on a climate treaty, and there's nothing wrong with that, except that we're being told that this is a science body when it's really a political body. And the purpose really of IPCC reports, and they don't tell you this on the website, you have to go do years of research before I finally figured it out. The purpose of these reports is actually to form a basis for climate treaty negotiations. It's not to give us the last view on science, because the scientists write this report, and then the summaries, which are the really important documents, they get rewritten by politicians and diplomats in week-long meetings. And it's only when these summaries have been haggled over, paragraph by paragraph, that they're released to the public, and the public is told that science has spoken. But in fact, what's just happened is a week of political massaging of a message that started with the scientists, but then it has become totally something very different.
It certainly has, and I think this was exposed several years ago with the Climate Gate, which came out of East Anglia University, with the famous hockey stick graph, and that went public. But what's astonishing is that they've managed to carry on, and it's really, the lies seem to be getting bigger and bigger.
Well, unfortunately, all of the governments of the world have bought into this IPCC process, which is 27 years old, and it isn't hard. It isn't easy to stand back and abandon that and say, no, we don't care about climate anymore. So it's got this incredible momentum, and I'm not quite sure how we stop it, because the climate treaty requires that governments get together once a year for a conference like the one that's happening right now in Paris.
So that's it. I mean, and it's implemented at local level by ICLEI, which is ICLEI, which no one's really heard of. I mean, I think this is the problem with the whole of the Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 policies, is that nobody's aware that these things are being implemented by the UN through local government and into their councils, and they think these are often local issues that are happening, and they realise they can't vote on them. So, but it is ramped up now. I live in an area of northeast London, and we've seen massive changes with the closure of roads and the implementation of these so-called villages and closing off basically public land. Now, this is where it gets a bit scary, isn't it?
Yes, because what is happening is that there are policies being decided at the UN level by UN bureaucrats, and then they are being implemented on the local level. And the policies are very top-down. They're not coming from communities. It's not people in the community saying, let's try this new approach. It's the UN through these organizations that target local groups, that's where the ideas are coming from. And the UN kind of has a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's not democratic, and it's not organic, and it's not what I think normal people want.
Could you tell us a bit about your first book?
Well, my first book has a very long title. It's called The Delinquent Teenager Who Was Mistaken for the World's Top Climate Expert. And it's really an expose of the IPCC. And the problem is putting IPCC in the title was difficult, because many people haven't heard of it. Unless you're kind of really into the environmental debate, you haven't heard of it. And of course, in the UK, the IPCC is the Police Complaints Commission.
That's right, Independent Police Complaints Commission.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I had to come up with this title that captured what I was talking about. And so my first research into the IPCC, everyone was praising it to the skies and saying this is this professional organization, and it's reliable, and it's trustworthy, and it's careful, and it's precise. And I pictured this person in a business suit and very buttoned down and very responsible. And the more I learned about the IPCC, the more it seemed to me that it really was this delinquent teenager. It was out there, a bit scruffy, with lots of bravado, doing some very odd, very strange things. And there didn't seem to be any adults in the room saying, wait a minute here, you're not being very persuasive when you don't follow your own rules, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is what the public don't realise. They're being fed something by the mainstream media, which, as we just stated, has previously kind of fallen apart, but is still going. It's like a steamroller now. And this latest conference, we're on the other side of town, so we don't know what they're talking about. But this is being promoted now as the last chance to save the planet, basically. And what we know is going to be massive taxation and destroying developing countries. That's really what's going to happen. Can you tell us a bit about why that is?
Well, the last chance to save the world, we've heard that a great deal. We heard it a great deal in 2009 when the same conference was going on in Copenhagen. So, it's always the last chance to save the world. In fact, environmentalists have been telling us this since at least the 70s. So we need to be careful when we hear that. But yes, these are policies that are about the UN would love an excuse to tax us all. Who wouldn't? But particularly at the global level, the UN is always worried about its funding. It's a bureaucracy, and bureaucracies are always trying to expand their mandate. That's what they do. The UN is always looking, it seems to me, now that I've started paying attention to it, for a reason to tax us. And that's very scary because the UN is a totally unaccountable organization. We as citizens do not vote for UN leaders. We don't have any ability to recall those leaders if we feel that they are misbehaving. So this is a big scary notion that we might have taxation without representation. That is profoundly undemocratic, and everyone should be concerned about it. And we should also be very concerned about a movement that is very unsympathetic to poor people. Okay, there are many people in this world that are living without electricity, who need a reliable source of power so that they can study at night, so that they can go out on the streets at night and be safe, so that their hospitals can run 24/7, and that you can refrigerate their food and not be worried about food poisoning. So they have access to industrial jobs. You can't have a factory in a poor country if there's no reliable source of power to run that factory. And unfortunately, the movement that is concerned about global warming seems to be more concerned about what might happen to our grandchildren, who haven't been born yet, than people here and now in the third world who are desperate and who are still perishing because they don't have basic infrastructure.
I think Tom Harris was talking about this yesterday, adaptation versus mitigation. The amount of money for mitigation is huge because really what we find out when we study this is that it's not based on any scientific fact. It's actually based on scientific fraud, and I can say that with some confidence because there's been some very, very interesting and very well-researched speakers here with very scientific backgrounds, and the information is there if people want it. What do you think we can do about it?
Well, I think it's a slow process of educating ourselves, and we have to give the environmental movement credit. They've been toiling away for many, many decades. The first Earth Day was 1970. They have been working very hard and very steadily for decades, and we all care about the environment. Of course we do, but it seems the pendulum has kind of swung to the point where we're caring more about the environment than we're caring about human beings. And we do live in a world that, the United Nations tells us, the World Health Organization tells us that 5 million children under the age of 5 perish every year still in this world because they don't have adequate nutrition, because they are not protected against malaria, because they don't have access to clean water, basic sanitation. 5 million children under the age of 5 are dying every year in this world, and we are spending trillions of dollars worrying about what the weather might do 100 years from now. There's something very morally wrong with that.
Yeah, and it's a politicised agenda, and it's a big agenda, and it's very difficult to get it over simply, but it's really based on control of population and the taxation of the population and the ownership of all assets, really. Is this something that you've looked into in your research, the actual owning of everything in the world by the UN, basically through local authorities, and land grabs, etc., and control of electricity and water? And they're now talking about that there will be power cuts and everyone's going to have a smart meter. We know all this is being rolled out, and it's been rolled out in America, in California, slightly quicker than it is in the UK, but the same policies are available for people to see. You can look at this stuff up, and it's the same template all over the world, isn't it?
Well, to be honest, I haven't personally done a lot of research in that area, but the things you are saying, 5 years ago, before I started doing my research into the IPCC, I might have thought sounded very outlandish and maybe even a little conspiratorial.
Yes.
But now, the more I learn about the UN, the scarier it is, and many of things are going on that are quite questionable and quite frightening and profoundly anti-democratic. We have a right to decide our own fate, and it is not the business of unelected bureaucrats in the UN to decide how the rest of us should live and how many resources we should use. That is our own decision.
That's exactly right, and what we're finding is also, when you look at the charter, that we were talking about it yesterday, of the UN, that they are above international law and they cannot be prosecuted.
Well, that's a very interesting thing. You hear about, the UN is setting up a new organization. Isn't that wonderful? And what we don't appreciate, and I'm a journalist and I didn't realize this until very recently, is that a UN organization is absolutely unaccountable to anyone. They have absolute immunity from prosecution. They have no effective whistleblowing protection. So if there's something really terrible going on in a UN organization and a whistleblower comes forward to try to make the public aware of that whistleblower inevitably loses their job. They are punished for doing the right thing. There is no freedom of information legislation that covers UN organizations. So a very basic tool that journalists use in democracies to keep an eye on what government is doing does not apply to the UN. So you have a very highly unaccountable, absolutely immune group of organizations, and that's just that's a recipe for disaster.
It certainly is, and the thing that people have to remember is all this is being implemented locally. It's not like the UN is far away from you. They're in your local authority. Their policies are implemented in the UK through the Climate Action Plan as they are in America, and the policies are the same all over the world, and these people have not been elected, they are unaccountable, but if people at a local level wake up to this and realise that they're having basically policies enforced on them which are to their detriment, then something can be done about this. So thanks very much, Donna.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.